In most other gacha games, in order to get the best character in the game, you have to summon for them. However, Solo Leveling Rise is a lot different, as Jinwoo is the main character used in the game and is of course free, which is why it's extremely important to build him correctly. Which is why today I'm going to be going over how you can best build Jinwoo. And starting off with his artifact gear sets, and there are two that I think are really good, and then some that can be used but just won't be as good. But I definitely think the two best gear sets you can equip for him are going to be the toughness gear set, as you can get an 8% crit rate increase on the 2 set effect, as well as a 4 on the 4 set effect. You can get a 32% crit damage increase. And then this gear set will be the perfect fit for one of the other accessory sets, which I'll mention in a little bit. And then moving on to one of his other best gear sets, being the one-hit kill gear set. This is just an amazing gear set for pretty much any DPS in the game, as on the 2 set effect you can increase your ultimate skill damage by 25%, which is always amazing, as Jinwoo's ultimate has some of the highest multipliers in the game, so it's going to do some of the highest amount of damage numbers in the game as well. And then the 4 set effect is really what turns this gear set from really good to just insane, as you can then also decrease your ultimate skill cooldown by 40%. So being able to reduce this by 40% is actually a really big deal, and it's going to give you a lot more damage. And then moving on to his best accessory sets, or I should say best accessory set, as I genuinely think you should never ever run any other accessory gear set apart from the expert gear set, as this is by far the best one in my opinion anyways. As on the 2 set effect you'll be able to get a really good bonus of whenever you land a crit, you'll have a 25% chance to increase your attack by 0.8%, which can stack up to 100 times. And then although this doesn't sound like amazing at first because you only have a 25% chance in order for that to happen, the 4 set effect makes it so much better and just adds a lot of quality of life to this gear set, as basically all the 4 set effect will increase the activation rate from 25% all the way to 50%, so 1 in every 2 critical hits that you get, you'll then be able to get that attack increase, assuming you don't get really unlucky anyways. And then also the attack increase actually also doubles from 0.8% to 1.6%, which means you can get a 160% attack increase. So then let's talk about all of his best main stats for all of these different types of gears, and obviously it's going to depend on what kind of weapons and skills you're using for things like the bracelet. And of course we start off with the helmet, and on the helmet I would 100% recommend attack percent, as the vast majority of Jinwoo's skills actually do scale off of the attack stats. So yeah, your attack stat is going to be one of your most important stats for you to use. And then the body armor as well as the gloves will always give you defense and attack, with the body armor giving you defense, the gloves giving you attack, so no need to worry about that. And then on the boots I'd recommend critical hit damage, as this is going to give you a massive damage multiplier for when you do land those crits, and because especially if you're running the toughness gear set and also the expert gear set, you're going to want to crit a ton, so you might as well make those crits do even more damage. Onto accessories, of course the necklace will always give you HP, and then for the bracelet it pretty much comes down to what kind of weapons that you're using, as a lot of the time I'm using a lot of dark weapons on my Jinwoo, so I always go for the dark damage increase. So for you to decide what main stat you should get on this piece, then you're just going to have to look at what weapons you use the most, as well as what elemental skills you use the most, to then decide which one you think would be best. Then for the ring, it's going to be attack or attack percent. Attack percent will give you the larger increase most of the time, so you're going to want that. And then finally, the earrings will always give you additional mana points, so that's always amazing. And then moving on to substats, there's a lot of different substats you're going to want for Jinwoo. Obviously, for the artifact side, you're going to want to get your critical hit rate substat, so you can increase his crit chance in order to get a really decent chance to always apply your expert attack increases. And then things like attack percent are always going to be really good. Defense penetration is also amazing. Damage increase can also work fine, as pretty much your whole entire goal is going to be to increase how much damage your Jinwoo can do. So literally any substat in the game that increases the amount of damage that you can do is going to be fine, so you don't need to worry too much. Just make sure you're looking out for those kinds of things. And then on the side of accessories, it's literally the exact same thing, but of course you can go for crit damage instead of crit rate, as you can't get crit rate substats on your accessories, so you're going to want to look for crit damage instead, but then all of the rest still applies. And speaking of stats, just like in the series, you can actually assign Jinwoo a lot of different stat points, as there's 5 different stats that you can invest into Jinwoo, being strength, vitality, agility, intelligence, perception, which all give different benefits. So then which of these 5 stats are going to be the ones you want to invest into the most? And if you've seen through how I've statted out my Jinwoo, I've done a mix of strength, agility, and also perception. Strength is always a very useful stat because it'll increase your attack stat. Agility is always amazing, as it can help increase your critical hit rate, as also critical hit damage. And then finally, perception is always great to increase your minimum amount of damage that you can deal. And when it does actually come to statting your Jinwoo, you're just going to have to cater towards your what your Jinwoo is currently needing, as the amount of precision that you need need will also depend on how many dupes you have in your weapons, as weapons with dupes will always apply the precision stat. So for example, if you've got 2 SSR weapons that are completely duped out, then you've probably already got an extremely high amount of precision, so you won't really need to invest many more stat points into the perception stat. And then the same will then apply for agility, as if you have a lot of gear pieces that give you critical hit rate substats, then you don't really need that many points in agility, as you'll be able to get all of your crit stats from your main body armors and stuff like that. So there's not really like a definitive best formula as what will give you the best sort of build, because it really just depends on what kind of Jinwoo you currently have and what your stats on your artifacts and stuff are like that. But overall, the general rule of thumb is a mix of strength and perception, or a mix of strength, agility, and perception. So just do with that what you will, I guess. Alright, so moving on to weapons for Song Jinwoo, I'm just going to quickly go over all of Song Jinwoo's best weapons for each element, and I'll also cover free-to-play options for those elements as well. So starting off with the Dark element, and the Demonic Plumflower Sword is the best Dark weapon, but the Moon Shadow and also Shadow Scythe are also great opportunities, with the Shadow Scythe being a free-to-play weapon. And then one of the best light weapons in the game is also the Huntsman, with the Radiru family's Longbow being a really good free-to-play option for a light weapon as well, and this one might also actually be the best light weapon in the game as well. Then moving on to fire weapons, Orb of Avarice I think is the best fire weapon in the game, and is of an SR rarity, so you can get it pretty easily. But if you do have Vulcan's Rage, you can also use it as well. It is usable, obviously, it's just not as good, anywhere near as good as a lot of the other SSR weapons are, unfortunately. For water weapons, Thetis' Grimoire is by far the best water weapon in the game. And then for water weapons, I think Karsuka's Venom Fang is going to be your best free-to-play option, as it is literally completely for free and also applies the bleed debuff. For wind weapons, I think the West Wind is the best weapon in the game. And then of course the Demon King's Longsword is also actually very good, because it's just received a nice buff for it very recently. And that pretty much covers it all, I think. If you have any more questions, then don't forget to leave them down in the comments below. And then moving on to probably one of, if not the most important thing when you are using Song Jinwoo, and that is his skills. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly go over all of the skills and whether they're actually useful or not. And starting off with Double Slash, this skill is practically useless. I would never recommend using this skill, as all of its runes don't really give you any good increases to anything. Second is Crushing Blow, and this skill is actually can be extremely useful, especially the Dark one, because you can deal a ton of break damage with it, and it also does cover 4 of the 5 different elements that are within the game. Dagger Toss is up next, and yeah, this skill is also kind of useless. I don't really see many usages for it. The best one is probably Ascension, as you can increase the damage that you deal to targets in the break state by 70%, but even then I still don't think this skill is very good. Multi-Strike is up next, and it's probably one of, if not the best skills that you get in the early game, as also it does cover 4 of the 5 different elements and can give you some really good increases. Vertical Arts is another also very decent skill, as you can cover 4 of the 5 different elements, with it also having a bunch of AoE potential through Gale and other things, and pretty much just most of them in general. Karting Rush is an okay skill, it's not too bad. I think the best one is going to be Annihilation, as you can increase your damage by 70% to enemies in the break state, which also has a 700% damage multiplier at my current level 3. Vital Strike is a similar story to Karting Rush, as there's only really one that is somewhat useful, and that is Hone In, as you can increase the damage dealt to bosses and elite monsters by 45%. And then for Mutilate, there's only really 2 that I'd recommend that you use, with Cold Storm being really good for applying a 2-second freeze, and then Stroke of Lightning, which is going to give you a ton of dark damage, as it has a massive multiplier with a 30% chance to ignore 100% of your target's defense. Next up is Death Stance, and this is probably my favorite skill in the game, and is the one that I definitely use the most, as it covers 4 different types of elements, which with 3 of the 4 of them having heavy break damage, with the wind one giving you weak break damage. But you do get Earth Shock for free, which will deal heavy break damage and will also increase your crit damage by 30% for 10 seconds as well, and can reset the cooldown of Commander's Touch, which is amazing. Speaking of Commander's Touch, this one is next, and this is another one of my favorite skills, as it absolutely excels at taking out a massive hordes of enemies. So with things like Black Hole, and pretty much with all of them, they all do some really good AoE damage. And then finally, the new basic skill, Armor Break, is the best breaking skill in the game, as all of them apply almighty break damage, which is the most amount of break damage that you can get from any skill in the game. And then finally, the ultimates, Truth Mutilate is by far the best ultimate, as it just does way more damage than Darkness Obliteration, and none of them, and that's pretty much the only difference between them, is that one does more damage than the other. So I would just recommend, if you're going to level up one skill, it'd be Truth Mutilate, and should be the only ultimate skill you ever use. So then moving on, we have another very important part of when building Jinwoo, and that is going to be his Blessing Stones, and there are a ton of different Blessing Stones that you can go through, so I'm just going to quickly list all of the ones that I think are the best. With the first one being Advanced Dagger Technique, as you can get a pretty decent damage increase when your enemies are below 70% or less HP. Daily Quest Completion is another fantastic one, as as it pretty much just gives you another life in battle, which is an amazing lifesaver. Mana Rampage is next, and you can get a 6% attack increase, but it will increase your mana point consumption by 8%. However, if you've got a character like Juhi, then that's not really a problem. Reawakening is amazing, as there's no drawbacks with this, as it will just decrease all of your skill cooldowns by 8%, which is also amazing. Bloodlust is also amazing, as you can, whenever you attack an enemy target, you'll decrease their defense by 4% for 6 seconds, which is really good. But you can also decrease your attacker's attack by 4% when you take damage from enemies as well. So not only does it make you deal more damage, but it makes you a little bit more tankier as well. Pulverize is another great one, as it increases your break effectiveness by 12%, as well as also the damage that you deal to targets affected by the break effect by 12% as well. Wolf Assassin is a really good skill that you can use when facing off against a bunch of different enemies and in stages and gates that don't really require you to fight any bosses. And then Chains of Blood is a bit of a risky blessing stone, however you can get some really big benefits from this, as pretty much the lower your HP is, the more damage you'll deal, but you'll also take more damage. And then Double-Edged Sword I also really like, as you can get up to an 8% attack increase, which is very easily stackable, but you also do increase the attack of your enemy targets, but as long as you're dashing well enough, then you won't really need to bother about this negative. And then to help with you dodging all of your enemies' attacks, Swiftness can also be really good, as you can get 1 additional dash, plus having a 12% chance to reset your dash cooldown whenever you dash, which is really good. And then Weakness Detection is also a very universal one, as it can be pretty much brought into most stages where you do have the elemental type advantage. And then Photo Strike can be good, as if you're lacking a bit of break damage, then this can be a consistent way of applying break damage, even when you're not using your skills. So then finally, when it comes to building teams for Jinwoo, your teams will change a ton depending on what kind of content you're bouncing to and from. As of course, if you're fighting off against bosses with break meters, especially replenishable ones, then of course you're going to want to bring characters that deal break damage. And then if you're not doing that, or even if you are doing that, then even characters like Shahane, Min Byung-gu, who do support in just his flat damage, can be also really good. But it really does honestly genuinely depend to what kind of content you're doing, as some characters are really good for things like dungeon breaks, as like Lee Ju-hee is a fantastic character for things like dungeon breaks and just that sort of format where you do fight alongside your hunters instead of using their support skills. But then when it comes to shadows, there are definitely best shadows that you can pick, as I pretty much just in any scenario, I think Igris, Blades, and also Iron are the 3 best shadows in the game, as Igris applies the bleed debuff, so you'll get a bunch of single target damage with him. Blades is the opposite and applies a bunch of AoE damage, and then Iron also applies defense decreasing as well. And not to mention, because you're going to want to be getting extra crit stats so you can crit more to proc your expert gear set buffs, then Igris's Shadow Authority buff, being a crit rate buff, is also going to be the best one that you're going to want for him. So there you have it. That is the complete best build guide for Sung Jinwoo, and I've covered, I think, practically everything. So if you did enjoy this video or you found it useful, then don't forget to like and subscribe, as it helps a ton, and click the link down below to support me as a creator, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.